I'm thrilled to welcome you all today to today's webinar with Heartful. We've got Jen Clark here. I'm sure you all are very familiar with Jen. I'm Anna. I'm one of the campaign managers here at Birchal. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm beaming in from today. Birchal is on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Now, Birchal is working with Heartful on an upcoming crowdsource funding offer. Some of you may not have heard of crowdsource funding. It's also known as equity crowdfunding. It's a relatively new form of fundraising in Australia that allows startups and small businesses to raise capital from a large number of smaller, also known as retail investors, and wholesale or sophisticated investors through an online platform like Birchal. Instead of seeking funding from traditional sources such as banks or venture capitalists, companies can turn to the general public, their communities, their customers. I know Jen has a big community of hosts who just absolutely love what she does. And it's often, it's to raise money in exchange for shares or equity in their business. Now, Birchal Financial Services will be the licensed intermediary for the offer. The information and discussion in this webinar is for informational purposes and should not be considered as advice or a recommendation to invest. Please do your own research. Always consider the offer document and the general CSF risk warning before investing. That's available on birchal.com, which I dare say is how you found us here today. Now, just a quick little intro on how today's session will run. Jenny's going to take us through a presentation, approximately 15 to 20 minutes, all about Heartful, its genesis. I know it's a really beautiful story that I'm sure you're really excited to hear about. And then we'll switch to a Q&A. So you'll all notice there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please, pop your questions in here throughout the session, and then we'll have time at the end to get to all of those. And also, if you're busy, I get it. The session will be recorded. If you've got to duck off, never fear. We'll send the recording around afterwards, so you'll be able to get your hands on it. And that is enough from me. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thanks to everyone for coming today. I really appreciate your time. I should just start by saying it is pouring rain here where I am at the moment in Woodend, so hopefully the audio is okay. I'll do my best to speak as loudly and clearly as I can. I really just wanted to first say a quick thank you also to Anna and to everyone at Birchal for supporting me in this campaign to date. Being able to run a campaign like this is an enormous undertaking, and it wouldn't be possible without a platform like Birchal. So thank you very much to Anna and to the team at Birchal. A bit of an overview before I begin. I just wanted to let you know I'll be splitting my presentation into a few different parts today. So firstly, I thought it was fairly pivotal for you to get an insight into me and my personal background, as I know that if I was investing in an early stage company, I'd want to have a good grasp of who the founder was and what professional and life experience they're bringing to the table and what their values are. Secondly, I'll be talking briefly about the establishment of the current Hosting with Heart podcast, Facebook community and accommodation directory. And lastly, I'll be covering off on the current state of play in the local and international short-term accommodation sector, along with an overview of the Heartful platform specifically, including my why for creating it, why I believe now is the right time to launch it, how the platform will work and generate revenue, and who it will fundamentally serve. Okay, so to start with, who am I? A bit about me. Firstly, my name's Jen Clark, for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before. I think that bit's probably obvious. I was born in Carlton in Melbourne in May 1978. I'm the first child of a nurse, Sue, and an architect, Ross. I grew up in Melbourne's western suburbs, spending most of my childhood and school years in the then working class suburb of Williamstown, on Yalukut Willam land. After successfully finishing high school, I was accepted into an architecture degree at Deakin University, which I excitedly started, but after a couple of months of absolutely loving the design aspect but failing to get my head around the building science, I deferred, got a part-time job for the rest of the year and ended up enrolling in an arts degree at Melbourne Uni, which I absolutely loved. A few years later, having spent some time working in various communications roles and on a more personal note, having finally come to terms with my sexuality, including a very public coming out speech at my 21st birthday party after a few too many champagnes, I landed a job at a company then known as Pacific Access, later renamed Census. At the time, Census was Australia's biggest online directories business, managing highly complex data-intensive platforms, including Yellow Pages, White Pages, the then equivalent of Google Maps Where Is, Trading Post Online, and City Search. In my 4 years at Census, I received 5 internal promotions, the last of which, at the ripe old age of 26, was the position of Interactive Design Manager, overseeing a team managing the interface design of all those platforms I just mentioned. I will always cherish the time I spent at Census and the incredible friendships I made, but I eventually felt a calling towards something more autonomous and creative. And so I left the company to start my first small business, a design and publishing house called Ripe Off the Press. Having received a $10,000 performance bonus when I left Census to start Ripe, most people told me to put it towards a house deposit or a car. But no, I was hell-bent on using it to self-publish my own book about the Australian design sector, Designation. Designation ultimately sold out and has since become known as a bit of a collector's item. We went on to publish a further 12 art and design titles in the 5 years that Ripe existed, along with establishing a thriving graphic design practice, the combination of which earned us finalist status in the 2008 Telstra Business Awards. With my then business partner wanting to pursue a different path in the teaching sector, we made the mutual decision to wind up Ripe, and I then went back to the mainstream workforce for a few years, including some time working for Monash University's Faculty of Art and Design and in a role as creative director for Salsa Digital, a growing web design agency. I think once you've experienced the many joys of working for yourself, and I know a lot of you who'll be listening to this talk today will have done that, along with some incredible successes, it can be very hard to go back. So yet again, I left Salsa to go out on my own, this time in my own multidisciplinary art and design practice, Jen Clark Design. That was 12 years ago, and since then, myself and my extended team of designers have completed several hundred projects, mostly for not-for-profit health, educational and public sector clients who I like to say and think are doing good things in the world. We've also won a number of awards, most notably the Australian Web Industry Association's Startup Website of the Year Award for our work in 2017 on the Style Sourcebook website, which has gone on to receive over $1 million in venture capital funding. Running a successful small business certainly hasn't been without its challenges though. Aside from the usual ups and downs relating to tight deadlines, cash flow, staffing, technology and customer service, in early 2017, when I was 8 months pregnant with my son Max, we had a drunk driver crash through the front of our Collingwood-based studio, rendering it completely uninhabitable. This is the studio before the accident, and this is what it looked like afterwards. A ton of bureaucracy and red tape later, and a very tiny infant in tow, I made the move to working from home permanently. One that would ironically end up being super timely given the COVID pandemic that I then had no idea was only 2 years away. Which leads me to part 2 of my presentation, covering off on my more recent professional past in the short-term accommodation sector. Having spent a few years on the roller coaster ride that is egg donation and IVF, and at that point living in a noisy, polluted part of inner northern Melbourne, in 2018, my partner Kirsty and I decided to look for somewhere bigger and quieter to live and raise Max, our son. After having a wine or two one night, we performed a search on Gumtree for a 3-bedroom rental anywhere in Victoria. This is how desperate we were. Ever so fortuitously, we stumbled across a beautiful home in Woodend in Victoria's leafy Macedon Ranges, about an hour from Melbourne. We went to inspect it, applied immediately thereafter and got approved, something we now look back on as one of the best things to ever happen to us. Having just turned 40 and inspired by the amazing regional communities around us, I decided it was time for a career change. After listening to a particularly inspiring podcast in the car one morning, I decided I'd give managing holiday properties a go. My first experience of hosting was actually back in late 2013 when Airbnb was in its relevant infancy and I decided to lease out the 2nd bedroom of my then house. I did this for 6 months, and in that 6 months, I welcomed every type of guest conceivable, from European backpackers to regional Victorians seeking a city escape. I also did every type of cleaning conceivable, including on one occasion throwing out an entire bin full of shaved body hair. Anyone here who has run accommodation before will feel my pain. Despite this, I'd absolutely devoured the experience and had proven to be really good at it, so I was keen to try my hand at hosting on a bigger scale. With the blessing of the owner to sublet their property as holiday accommodation, I secured my first property, a newly renovated 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in the township of Kyneton in April 2019. Later that year, I also started Hosting with Heart, a podcast that would serve to document my journey as a relatively green accommodation host, and give me the opportunity to learn from those who'd come before me and connect with others along the way. Some more shots of the Fox House for you. The Kyneton House, which we decided to call the Fox House after the owner's son Fox, went from nowhere to the #1 holiday property out of the 73 listed in Kyneton in terms of both revenue and occupancy in 9 short months, as per this screen grab from short-term rental data analytics company AirDNA. We added another 5 properties to the stable within 12 months and turned this into an exciting and innovative new property management business, Rangers Escapes. And then along came COVID in 2020. As the lockdowns kicked in, we had to make the heartbreaking decision to let those additional 5 properties go, despite throwing every cent we had, and even some we didn't have, at trying to keep them open. By the start of 2021, we were back where we started at 1 property, the Fox House. During that month, our beloved dog, George, a rescue greyhound, passed away, and for some reason it was that event that crystallised my decision to close Rangers Escapes, but keep that last property open indefinitely, indulging my love for hosting. Another 6 months came and went, and so did 3 lockdowns. We then came to a point where we had to make the very difficult decision to close the doors of the Fox House. So after selling everything in it, we shut up shop. I took 6 months off recording Hosting with Heart to give me some much needed time to nurture my still flourishing design practice, Jen Clark Design, and to reassess what I wanted to do. During this time, my son Max was diagnosed as autistic, and this sparked a journey of discovery for both my partner and I as well, learning that we were both part of the lost generation of neurodivergent women, as only in the last 10 years has there been a growing understanding of how autism and ADHD looks in women. I had also suffered chronic pain for most of my adult life and discovered this was linked to a genetic connective tissue disorder called Marfan syndrome that commonly co-occurs with autism. This period of personal growth, culminating in the crystallisation of my values, especially those relating to social justice, equity and environmentalism, ultimately did me a lot of good. And by February 2022, despite no longer having an accommodation business of my own, my passion for hosting was stronger than ever. I got back on the wagon and committed to start recording again. The extra available time I had ironically enabled me to put a lot more energy into the podcast, releasing an episode a week. The Facebook group I'd started for listeners of the podcast to connect and share ideas was still going strong too, at that point verging on 500 members. We have 1,300 members in that group today. After a short time, the concept of a new website that would act as a directory of the properties of some of the most passionate, dedicated and hardworking members of this group, not to mention highly empathetic, socially conscious and committed to sustainability, was born. In late August 2022, after several months working with a team of usability specialists, designers and web developers, I proudly launched the new Hosting with Heart website with 30 listed members on board. Despite a few technical hiccups in the first month or two, the Hosting with Heart directory quickly swelled to over 130 listed members by June 2023, representing over 300% growth in just over 9 months. But having regularly canvassed their feedback as the directory grew, including through the formation of an advisory group comprising 5 of our most passionate and engaged members, I found that many hosts were vocal about wanting more than a simple directory. They were eager for guests to be able to book directly on our site, with a strong preference for us migrating to a commission-based rather than subscription-based model. Being acutely aware of the climate crisis and with a renewed and deeply personal understanding of the experience of disability, particularly the social model of disability, which advocates for changing the world to better fit the needs of people rather than changing people to fit the world, it seemed to me to be glaringly obvious that not enough was being done in the short-term accommodation sector to acknowledge and address either the urgent need for us to embrace a sustainable future or the increasingly diverse needs of guests. But I also knew hosts who put their whole heart into their hosting, who deeply empathised with First Nations communities, who were regenerative farmers, who were building fully accessible accommodation and who were giving back to local communities. This to me was and always will be so inspiring and exciting. But this wasn't reflected in either the general stereotype of short-term accommodation owners in the media or on the big booking platforms. I knew my message resonated with the hosting community. My podcast had reached 100 downloads this year, 100 episodes, I should say. It's in the top 1.5% of podcasts internationally, with over 86,000 unique downloads. And I knew that there was also a huge demand for truly holistic properties from potential guests. On an almost daily basis, I was receiving direct messages from people either in or following our community, like this one that I received in January of this year from another Jen. So where does that leave us? Let's take a quick look at the status quo. The number of properties deemed sustainable hasn't been quantified. However, when surveyed last year, 74% of global travellers reported a desire to travel more sustainably, with 51% saying the pandemic exacerbated this. Despite this, 44% of travellers reported having no idea where to find sustainable accommodation options. It seemed very clear to me that there was an overwhelming gap in the market, also echoed in and reinforced by industry reports and surveys in the mainstream media, both here in Australia and further afield. A report by the Travel Corporation released in July 2023 found that there had been a huge shift in traveller sentiment post-COVID. A third of Aussies say they'll travel in the next 12 months and will seek out the most sustainable option possible. Moreover, if sustainable travel isn't possible, over a third of Australians would consider exploring more local options. This is reflected in an increase in domestic travel post-COVID. The pattern mirrors what is happening internationally. A tourism sector leader at Deloitte recently pointed to a growing awareness of travelling more sustainably as an example of a trend that was accelerated by the pandemic. On the 1st of October this year, only 2 days ago, I should say, she said, sustainability was certainly on everyone's lips before the pandemic, but now people are leaning into it. It's also about cultural considerations. People want to make sure that the money they spend is staying in the communities where they are staying and that they are being responsible visitors. In terms of accessible accommodation, Queensland made 2023 the year of accessible tourism, with an injection of $12 million in new funding invested to help the Queensland tourism industry better cater to visitors of all abilities. And nationally, the accessible tourism market is worth $3.3 billion, but more needs to be done. And the recent published findings of the Disability Royal Commission emphasise that far more needs to be done to support people with disabilities to participate in all aspects of life. Travel is a very important part of that. In the lead up to the launch of the Hosting with Heart directory, I'd established a framework for successful hosting based on my own experience as a host and the knowledge I'd gleaned from interviewing over 100 of the region's most successful hosts, called the Heartful Host. This comprised 5 core attributes: accessibility, creativity, sustainability, social responsibility, and quality. And almost immediately following my publicising it, it was embraced en masse by the hosting community as the go-to blueprint for truly holistic, successful hosting. It was this very framework from which the concept for Heartful was born. So, what is Heartful? Heartful is a new accommodation booking platform that seeks to address the shortfalls in the current market by helping travellers find high-quality accommodation that aligns with their ethics and caters to their individual needs. We also intend for the platform to take on an educative and supportive role, empowering and equipping hosts with guests with the knowledge, information and resources they need to become a more inclusive and environmentally and socially responsible. And how will it work? Heartful's business model comprises a highly competitive commission rate starting at 4% plus GST and booking fees on all booking revenue generated by our host listings. Following our launch, we plan to diversify revenue streams via a host learning hub and supplier marketplace. As opposed to focusing on a single property or holiday type, Heartful's point of difference is our host community's shared ethos. All listed properties must meet a baseline set of criteria spanning sustainability, accessibility, and social responsibility. And upon listing, every host must agree to a code of ethics. Rather than purely rewarding hosts for great guest reviews, hosts will be incentivized to improve their listings transparency and their property's Heartful credentials, ensuring a culture of continual improvement is fostered. Our mission and objectives. So our mission, very shortly articulated, is to reimagine the way we stay for an inclusive and sustainable future. Our key goals for the next 5 years to 2028 are as follows. 1, to become B Corp certified by 2026. 2, to reach 50,000 individual property listings, establishing ourselves as a market leader domestically and readying us to expand into overseas markets. 3, to develop a dynamic host learning hub and supplier marketplace that will offer secondary income streams. 4, to develop innovative host mentorship, annual awards and guest loyalty programs. And 5, and of equal importance, to use the Sustainable Development Goals as a governing framework, particularly Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. On a final note, I thought it was really important to let you know what my why is. I truly believe that now is the time for the world to embrace a more heartful way of living, informed by genuine empathy for other people and their diverse needs and for our natural environment. The tide right now is rising, and there is a rapidly growing community of both hosts and guests who share my vision and want to help me realise it. I believe Heartful has the capacity to significantly change the quality of people's lives and protect and conserve our planet in the process. Its time has arrived. Thank you so much for listening, and I would welcome your questions.
And I'm back. Thank you, Jen. That was
You're very welcome.
Really fascinating and quite the journey you have had.
It sure has been.
It's very exciting to hear a little bit more about your background. I know so many of your community are so familiar with you, and it's great for you to share that with everyone on the call here today. We've got some questions coming through here. So
Sure.
Nick has asked, what potential risks do you foresee in this business, and how would you plan to mitigate them?
Oh, look, there are multiple risks. I think that's undeniable. With any platform of this size, I think we have to really have our eyes open as to what all of those potential risks are. I mean, it goes to things like increased competition in the space. Some of the trends I spoke about in the presentation just now will be, being acknowledged by a lot of different people. So I imagine that there'll be a number of people trying to implement different solutions to some of those trends, or in response to some of those trends. But I also think things like listing integrity is a huge risk that I see. So making sure that the property listings that will appear on Heartful are actually accurate and provide an honest description of a property. If I was a disabled person and I was actually booking a property with my specific needs in mind, I'd want to be really sure that property met those needs. So making sure that, there's this real spirit of honesty amongst our hosting community. Cybersecurity and things like that are also a big consideration, particularly in this day and age, and particularly with personal information being exchanged on the platform. You know, there's the possibility that we may not secure additional funding. This is a platform that will need will need capital in order to grow, especially to the scale and size that I'm hoping it will get to. Yeah, look, the list really goes on. There are multiple risk factors at play that we will be closely considering.
Amazing, and I'm sure they all keep you up at night.
They do, actually. Yeah, they do.
Amazing. It leads very well into a question we've got here from Howard. They've said, you've got 5 principles. What if a property has, say, 3 to 4 out of the 5? Do you make an assessment? Does that perhaps bar a 3 out of the 5 property?
That's a really good question. So at the moment, been working on a product framework, I guess, that will enable hosts who run properties that have different strengths to list their properties on the site. So it might be, for instance, if say a property has a lot of sustainability features, but perhaps has a lower amount of accessibility features, we might call that particular listing sort of a sustainability hero, or give it some kind of name along those lines. So I think we'll be coming up with a product framework that will help hosts clearly communicate the strengths of their property to the audience that we're targeting with Heartful. We certainly don't expect hosts to be able to tick all boxes. That's just an impossibility. No one is perfect, and that's certainly not what this site is about. It's about playing to the strengths of the properties that are listed on it. So yeah, the framework for the product will be designed in accordance with that.
Amazing. Tiffany's also asked, in reference to this question, what if you're not accessible at all?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. I think as long as we're clear about that, and as long as the property meets some other criteria that will be within our sort of broader listing criteria, I think that's the most important thing. I think what people who are visiting the site will ultimately want to see is a commitment from that host that they are working towards more accessible features. So if a property was to have no accessible features, I would be encouraging a host to communicate in their listing what their plans are to introduce them. And look, that will be part of the listing process and sign off and approval process, I should say, too. We'll need to get an understanding from each host as to what their future plans are, as well as what the credentials of their property currently are. So it's, as I said in the presentation, it's really about that culture of continual improvement and just wanting to do better and to make our properties better. It's not about achieving perfection. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Feel free to contact me after this session. I'd be more than happy to have a further chat about that.
Absolutely. It ties beautifully in with Jodie's question. They've asked how you plan to balance the need to maintain your ethics versus growing listings. Have you done any work to know if those numbers of listings are motivated to reach your standards?
Yeah, that's also
questions there.
No, that's okay. No, that's welcomed. Look, I think in looking at the broader sector and what's happening at the moment, and also looking at what the existing Posting with Heart community have expressed about how a platform might best suit their requirements, or their property credentials. I think looking at those things, it's very clear that there's a really significant audience there for this platform. In terms of could you just repeat that question for me again? Sorry, Anna, just so that I can make sure I cover all of it.
It was, they've asked how you plan to balance the need to maintain your ethics versus growing listings. And then the second part of the questions was, have you done any work to know if these number of listings are motivated to reach your standards?
Sure. So I think I've just answered sort of the second part of that question. I think that in looking at the broader sector and looking at the competitive landscape, I don't believe that there's a platform out there at the moment that exists that really has the inclusion and sustainability sort of features at its core. I think that's what Heartful's all about. What I said before about us not wanting to be a platform about perfection was true. I think we will find a way to reach a balance between who can list on the site and, and how we best kind of promote the strengths of that particular property. So you won't, as a host, you won't need to meet like an exhaustive list of criteria to list on the site. There'll be, not too high a barrier to entry, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But at the same time, the code of ethics that we plan to introduce, that's something that all hosts who do list on the site will need to agree with. And that goes to things like how you actually interact with customers, with guests, I should say, and how you conduct your business, your communication style, a whole lot of other things. I think by all of our hosts needing to agree to that, that will be one way that we'll be trying to kind of safeguard the ethics of the people who are actually listing on the site. So, and we're in the process of determining all the detail that will go into that code of ethics as I speak.
I guess in a sense, you're giving your guests the ability to shop with their values, and the visibility is what you're providing. Yeah, amazing.
That's exactly right. And look, I just can't reinforce enough that it's not about being perfect. It's about a shared ethos, as I said in the presentation. That will be the common factor that everyone who lists on the site will have. And that will be reflected in that code of ethics. And then the way that listings will be displayed will talk to property strengths. So, and that will be, we're in the process of determining what that product framework looks like at the moment.
Amazing. This ties beautifully in with a question from Carolyn, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Carolyn. And I know this is something you care deeply about, so I'm very glad Carolyn's asked this question. Following on from Jonah's question, how do you plan to balance your ethics versus potentially taking accessible and sustainable properties off the long-term rental market?
Yeah, that is an amazing question. And look, I realised shortly after I finished this presentation today, I won't lie, that there was one core feature that I forgot to include in the presentation, and that is about, I guess, us operating in a way as a bit of a micro social enterprise. So one thing that I want us to do, and I say this as someone who has experienced housing stress personally in the past, I've rented over 35 properties, or lived in over 35 properties in my 45 years. I know exactly what it's like to be living in housing stress. So one thing that I really wanted this platform to do was to give back in some way to the social housing landscape. So we're aiming to donate 1% of annual revenue to social housing initiatives in Australia and New Zealand. Exactly who that organisation will be, or it might be a combination of organisations or a specific project. That's what we're working out at the moment. So we have to do a bit of due diligence in terms of who that might be, because we want to make sure that money is going to be used purposefully. But that was one thing that I was really passionate about doing with this particular platform. I think at the moment, and I think most people in the hosting community will agree with me, there's no one out there in the short-term accommodation space that is kind of acknowledging the role that short-term accommodation plays in the lack of long-term rentals at the moment, particularly in Australia. I know that's happening around the world as well in other countries. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that elephant in the room and to really commit to doing something positively about it. I think this whole framework around responsible, inclusive, sustainable hosting that gives back is a really positive way to do that. So I hope that sort of helps answer the question. I am completely open to exploring other initiatives that we might do down the track, whether it be, hosts opening their properties for a weekend a year to communities who are in need, or perhaps to people who are on low income so that they can take holidays. There are so many possibilities, and I'm completely open to having all those discussions. I would want this platform to be seen as one that is actively contributing to resolving some of these broader societal problems. I definitely don't want us to have our heads in the sand when it comes to those sorts of things.
And I guess this is where, we've talked about this before, Jen, the benefit of bringing on your engaged community, asking all of these amazing questions who care about all of the exact same things that you do as investors in your business is so important to you. So
absolutely. I think my commitment to social change and to social impact is at the core of Heartful and what I want it to do. We got to a point with hosting with Heart where I thought this platform could really scale, but it can't scale in its current format. Hence the idea to actually come up with a new standalone platform that can really achieve a whole lot more. So yeah.
Amazing. We'll shift gears slightly now. And
sure.
Everyone who's popping in their questions, thank you so much. I'm doing them slightly out of order to try and answer the similar questions together. So if I've not answered your question yet, don't worry, we're coming. Darren has asked, I want to get a sense of the competitive landscape. Which booking platforms would Heartful compete with, and to what extent are they focusing on accessibility?
That's a great question. And look, I should mention too, that's something that's addressed in detail in the CSF offer document. So we talk a lot about the competitive landscape there. Look, certainly broadly speaking, our main competitor is Airbnb. There's no disputing that. They are a global player, and we will be competing heavily with them. In terms of other more local operators, the two operators that come to mind are one business called Accessible Accommodation, who specialise in exactly that. They specialise only in accessible accommodation, but with a bit of a broader focus. So they don't just look at short-term accommodation; they look at longer-term accommodation and respite care and things like that. So they'll certainly be a core competitor. And the other one is Ripper Ride, who are a local adventure-based travel business who only operate at this time in New South Wales and Victoria, and also on the North Island in New Zealand. So those three competitors, I would say, are our core group of competitors, particularly those who are promoting independently managed accommodation rather than hotels or guest houses or whatever the case might be. So we'd be looking at those. And of course, peripherally to that, booking.com, VRBO, some of those bigger sites are certainly important for us to keep in mind. Having said that, they have a much broader focus, not only on independently managed accommodation, but also on hotels and other accommodation types. And that's a sort of a broad focus that I don't think that we'll ever have an interest in. My interest is always in the shared economy space. So looking at independently managed accommodation, managed by mums and dads and everyday people, rather than sort of hoteliers, etc. So I hope that answers most of that question. But
good. Max has asked, sort of leading on from that question, how do you plan to deal with the massive marketing power of the big OTA or online travel agency being a small OTA? I guess that ties into why you're here today as well, raising capital.
That's exactly why I'm here today. So I think it's really important for me to acknowledge that I'm not someone who is independently wealthy, and that's part of the reason why I'm here. I've to date put in around $75,000. I'll be completely honest about that, into establishing the Hosting with Heart directory and the peripheral activity that's gone on around that. That 75K, it wasn't savings, it wasn't gifted from a rich uncle or anything like that. It was actually money that I earned through my design practice by working some very, very long hours. So I was so committed to this site happening that it was a clear goal that I had with Jen Clark Design, and I still run Jen Clark Design to this day to help fund this platform, the Hosting with Heart platform at the moment. In terms of how we're going to afford to compete marketing-wise, we're going to need to fundraise, and this is the very first step in doing that. So I'm hoping that through this virtual process that we can raise enough funds, and I don't have any ridiculous goals. I realise it's a very challenging climate at the moment, But if we can raise enough money basically to get this platform up and live and launched, that would be amazing. I would be incredibly happy if that was to occur. So our next step will be raising further funds to be able to market the platform properly. I've already got people in place to help me with that. It's just a matter of raising that capital. And it will be a gradual growth process from there. I mean, this is a brand new platform. I'm under no illusions that it's going to take time to get that traction. But I think, you know, hopefully if this raise goes really successfully, we can certainly get off to a really good start. Yeah.
Perfect. This actually ties in great. I can't speak English today really well with Nick's question. They've asked, how do you intend to own this sustainability label within the hosting market so that Heartful is front of mind every time and not a competitor?
Yeah, look, I think we need to tap into the broader community. So it's not just about the hosting community. I think we really need to tap into the wider community that's passionate about sustainability. And through a lot of our marketing activity, that's the plan. So we'd be looking at getting exposure in a wide range of press. PR is going to be a very critical part of the plan. And I think really getting involved actively in other communities, other digital communities as well that are really passionate about sustainability, so that we do become that, you know, go-to platform for people who are looking for a sustainable short-term accommodation option. I think it's going to be that gradual process of building up a reputation in the sector as being, you know, someone who really owns that particular space. And is passionate about it and so forth. Yeah, that's going to involve myriad marketing activity and PR. It's also going to involve, yeah, just becoming very active in those, becoming very active in those communities as a founder and really advocating for what we're doing here. So it's going to be something that we just build up over time. And I think that, you know, in some of the stories that our host community will be able to tell about how they've built sustainable properties, and also through the learning hub that we're trying to create, or we're aiming to create, I think those will be really great channels for, you know, tangibly demonstrating how committed we are to sustainability. Yeah.
And as you've mentioned, you know, being really founder forward, you've already created such a name for yourself in this industry. So the work seems to be already started there.
Absolutely.
Nick has also asked, how do you measure, or how might you measure and report the sustainable and accessible impact of your business? Is this something you've thought about?
Absolutely. And that's going to be critical to the work we're doing. So built into the hosting, into the Heartful platform will be a way of looking at what our host community is doing individually and collectively in terms of their overall environmental responsibility, I guess. So what I'm hoping to do is, when I work with the web developers that we're hoping to work with on building this platform, part of that will be implementing some kind of reporting system that enables us to actually pull out metrics that tell us, you know, how our host communities are, or how our host community is performing in terms of our environmental footprint, both you know, on a regional basis and also on a state level. I think it's really important that we have transparency about that, because we want to be able to talk to our achievements as a platform, but we also want to be able to use some of those stats in marketing collateral as well. So I think having that real data focus in the back end of the website is going to be critical to being able to pull that data out and to use it to show that we're a community that is having a real impact. Yeah, and it's something that we're going to have to work on constantly. It's going to be an evolution. It's going to be something that we're just going to need to keep our focus on and find new ways of actually measuring that data.
Amazing. And we've got a question here. You've touched on the MVP hosting with Heart, yes, as being, you know, the real genesis of this idea. Darren's asked, was this generating revenue? And I'll just preface this question with, to be very clear for everyone on the call, the entity you're actually investing in is Heartful. So all of Jen's amazing work in hosting with Heart, that's a separate entity that's, you know, providing and underpinning all of this great work that Jen is now doing in Heartful. So please keep that in mind as Jen answers this question. Was hosting with Heart generating revenue? Sorry, I couldn't actually remember if I'd asked the question.
Yes. Sorry, I had to go back to the question then.
Oh, good.
No, look, hosting with Heart has been generating revenue. It's a subscription-based model now, and look, we've learned a lot from that subscription-based model. One of the core things that I've learned from implementing that, and it was originally implemented as a point of difference, because the aim was always to not have, or the immediate goal was to not have booking functionality on that site, for it to literally be a curated directory of properties that share similar features. So a subscription model seemed like the right way to go. It still generates revenue to this day. So there's a monthly fee involved in listing your property on the Hosting with Heart directory. And I'm actually really pleased to say that the revenue that has been generated from that MVP to date has almost paid for it, paid for the cost of the build and so forth. So that's a great outcome. That's all I ever really wanted for that directory. I wanted to test the market and see whether there was an appetite there for what I could see was a gap in the market. Yeah, so that will go on generating revenue. And Heartful will have a completely different revenue model. So that will be a commission-based model, you know, as compared to some of the other OTAs and our core competitors, which I think will really significantly reduce the barrier to entry. At the moment, people really want to know that they're going to get bang for their buck, that they're actually going to get bookings in their calendar as a result of listing on a site. With Hosting with Heart, the only downside of that is a whole lot of other inclusions as part of a Hosting with Heart membership, but there aren't any guaranteed bookings. And so I wanted to shuffle that revenue model so that we could give people who do list with us, you know, some certainty around the fact that they're very likely to get bookings. Yeah, so I hope that covers off on that question. It was a bit of a long-winded answer.
Definitely. And I think crucial to that is, Jen, you know, your community was so involved in the genesis of this idea through the Hosting with Heart, and, you know, your consultation with them was, you know, this is really what they were asking for. So it's exciting to see it underway.
Yeah, that's right.
So it is asked from a host.
And I think keeping that open dialogue with the members is really, really important. I think it's something that I've really tried to do with Hosting with Heart, is make sure that I'm really hearing what people who are listing on the site want from the site, what the ultimate outcome is for them. And so when the current Hosting with Heart member community started communicating to me that they wanted booking functionality, it got me thinking a lot about our revenue model. And I just started thinking, within the constraints of the current site, I felt like we couldn't necessarily employ a particularly complex booking system. Hence, another reason why we wanted to create Heartful.
Amazing. We've got a quick question here from Howard. They've asked, can you host on more than one site, meaning Heartful and another?
Yes, absolutely. I can't go into detail about it, but a lot of the revenue modelling that we've done on Heartful's future profitability has been based on hosts getting on average about 20% of their bookings through Heartful. So I'm under no illusions that it's going to take time for us to get, you know, a market share when Heartful launches. It's going to take some time. And I think I've been reasonably conservative in looking at the way that we will be able to generate income in that first sort of 12 to 24 months. But yeah, look, certainly it will work in a much similar way to the way it currently works, hosting on different platforms. You'll be able to pop an iCal link in your listing and everything, and have everything synced up. And we're also in the process of talking to third-party booking platforms such as Lodgify and so forth, who actually manage direct bookings as well as OTA listings. So to make sure that the site that we build is actually compatible with as many of those third-party platforms as possible. So that's going to be really, really important.
Yeah. No small feat, I'm sure.
No, it's not.
As you've just...
Yeah. Sorry,
go
ahead.
No, you go.
No, I was just going to say, hence the reason why, we do need significant funding at this stage, is because there is so much work in the back end that's going to need to go into this site to make it really hum, to make it a real success.
Yeah, we've got a question here you've just touched on, which ties well into Lee's question. They've asked, are there any financials or forecasts or business plan documents available as part of the EOI? I can't recall seeing these being made available prior to today. Great question, Lee. That's because they're not currently available. Just for a little bit of context of how we run these offers as a licensed intermediary, ASIC takes a firm view about future projections, whether that be product revenue or return on investment. For more information, I definitely recommend reviewing the offer document and the company's constitution to get more information about that. And you've also asked Lee about the current or proposed ownership structure. All of that information will be available in the offer document as well. Which ties on beautifully into Carolyn's question again. How much capital are you hoping to raise and what happens if the goal isn't reached? That's a really great question. Just a bit of context of the stage that we're at the moment. We're in the expression of interest phase. So the minimum and maximum targets of the raise aren't currently available. So do keep your eyes peeled on the Birchal platform. And if you haven't already expressed interest in Heartful's campaign, please do so. You'll be the first to find out when it goes live. But Jen, did you want to touch on a little bit more? You've sort of explained a little bit about, what would be required in getting the platform up and running. If you could share a little bit more about that. And yeah.
In terms of the financial outlay that's needed, is that okay to talk about in this session, or?
Yeah, so in terms of, you're building the platform, you've done all this amazing work. If you want to share anything with everyone on the call.
Yeah, sure. I mean, with the hosting with Heartside, it's a beautiful looking site and it's been a great success so far, which is fantastic, but it is quite a rudimentary site in terms of the back end and so forth. So with Heartful, we need something that's a lot more complex in terms of the build. It's really a project that will need to be handled by a software developer, essentially. So we're talking, well into the kind of hundreds of thousands of dollars to build it properly. So look, in terms of the amount that I'm actually hoping to raise, that will largely, we'll be solidifying and cementing that later this week once we've got an idea of the bigger picture of EOIs and how much we're actually likely to raise. But I think, anywhere upwards of about 90 to 100,000 is what we're going to be aiming for. Hopefully it will be a lot more than that, but once again, I'm not under any illusions as to how challenging the current financial climate is. But that's the sort of minimum ballpark that will enable us to get a first sort of version of the site off the ground with reasonable quality. So so that will be something that we'll decide on later this week.
Great. And as I said, if you haven't already expressed interest, please do so. You'll be first to find out. Jodie's asked, from a host side, measuring generally costs money, e.g. carbon accounting, possibly, actually, sorry, they haven't asked. It's a bit more of a statement, which you may like to comment on. It's possibly a little tricky if you want to remain accessible. Did you want me to repeat that? Because I cut myself off halfway. So measuring generally costs money. Measuring generally costs money, e.g. carbon accounting. It's possibly a little tricky if you want to remain accessible. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think, as I said, it's not about achieving perfection in every single area. I think it's about doing what you can where you can. So in terms of sustainability, I mean, some measures are super easy to implement regardless of how accessible your property might be or not. I mean, things like having recycling facilities or a composting facility for food waste. Smaller things like that are so easy and virtually cost nothing to implement. I think, look, it's really about finding that balance. So the way that the site will be structured, as I said, will play to the strengths of each property's characteristics rather than sort of trying to suggest that every property has to be perfect. The example that I will point to is one that I included in the presentation today, and that's the Grain Shed Retreat, which is in lower, or I should say lower south western Queensland. That is a property that has managed to implement a whole host of accessibility and sustainability features very successfully and on a budget. Belle Dubois, who's the host of that particular property, I actually interviewed on the Hosting with Heart podcast a few episodes ago, so it'd be well worth a listen to that. But I think, as I said, it's really just about trying to do what you can, where you can, and the site will be designed in such a way that it really speaks to the strengths of your property. So, yeah.
And I guess it ties in well with Jen, as you said, you plan on really playing an educative role in this as well,
yes,
and supporting hosts, and making it easier for hosts to to improve in whatever areas they wish to. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's all well and good for us to talk about doing this and doing that, but if we're not providing that, if we're not sort of serving that educative role and providing resources for our hosts to really expand their own knowledge, including really practical resources on how to actually make your properties more sustainable and accessible, we're failing in our duty. So I see us as being not only a site that will facilitate bookings and facilitate connections between hosts and guests, but that will ultimately aim to leave everyone with a bit more knowledge over time, and to building their knowledge, so that they can go on to implement those sorts of features in their own homes, etc., etc. So, yeah.
Especially when the demand was there. What is it? 75% of people want more 74%. Sustainable short term.
Yes.
So that's the demand's right there. We've got to make it easier for the hosts to
absolutely. But yeah, as I said, it's about filling those knowledge gaps, and that's what we're very committed to doing.
Amazing. We've got a question here from Nick, and then we're almost running out of time, so we'll whiz through the last couple. Nick's asked, do you have any developers currently in mind for the website? Have you got experience working with them? You obviously don't have to name them, but I'm sure you've done a lot of thinking on this.
I do. Yes, the answer to that question is I do. The web development firm that I would like to work with are actually a New Zealand-based custom software development firm, who I've spoken to about the project at length, and who have already provided me with a rough costing for the project. So I know exactly what to expect there. And yes, look, in my design career to date, which has been an over 25-year career, I've worked with web developers extensively. So I know exactly how to work with them. That's how we built the Hosting with Heart site. So there's no issues at all there. I'm very confident in collaborating with them.
It's wide open. All right, we've got a final statement here from Tiffany, and then I might get into a little bit more specifics about what's next. So Tiffany said they have a glamping and tiny house business. Congratulations, jealous. We might need to know where that is. And they've said it's hard. Do you have anything to say there?
It's hard at the moment, as in bookings are hard? Or?
Well, and perhaps Tiffany might like to add some more context just quickly in the box, but they've said they've got a tiny house and a glamping business, which is hard. So I imagine, and Jen, as you've said, you share the frustrations, and you've been there. So in regards to being
I have. I've been there. I know just how hard it is when you've put your heart and soul, pardon the pun, into a property or multiple properties, and the climate is just out of your control in a way. I know exactly what that feeling is like. I've been there myself. Everyone at the moment is doing it very hard. There's been a few different people who have contacted me in recent times that have been struggling with bookings. All I can say is that given some of the trends that I've discussed in this presentation, I don't think they're going away anytime soon. And I'm hoping that the advent of this platform and what it focuses on will help actually facilitate more bookings for hosts who are really committed to doing the right thing by other people and by the planet. So I don't know that the current platforms necessarily talk to those features as well as they could. And so that's something that I really am committed to doing through Heartful. So I really feel for you and know how hard it is. But I think, hopefully there are people out here like me who are trying to do something about fixing that status quo and trying to give back in the process. So I hope that puts your mind to ease a bit.
Yeah. And Tiffany has just specified as well, they also mean in regards to being accessible. And I'm sure you'd have some thoughts on that as well. And just from my rudiment, I've learned personally so much about what it means to be accessible or inclusive in a short-term accommodation just from getting to know you, Jen. And what I would say is, it's so broad, even down to dimmable lights, making it, a more inclusive or accessible place.
I mean, for someone like just sorry to cut you off, Anna. I was just going to say, for someone like my family who, we don't necessarily have a physical impediment, but things like, particularly to my son Max, things like artificial smells and dimmable lights and being able to darken an area and being in a calming environment where there's not a lot of noise around, all of those things are actually considered accessibility features. It's such a nuanced landscape. Like, there's no way of just saying, if you tick X, Y, and Z, then you're accessible. There are a whole lot of different things that you can do to actually contribute to how accessible your property is. And I think even in a glamping situation or a tiny house, there are still a lot of things that you can do to make your properties. They won't be accessible to everyone. That's a fact, but to make them more accessible to a larger group of people, I think that there are a lot of things that you can do. And it's just about being aware of those. So,
as we said, exactly, the being aware and adding the visibility, giving people the opportunity to search based on their needs, whether or not you meet all of them or not.
Exactly.
We've got a final question here from Megan, and there's a bit going here, and I'll cover most of it because they're great questions. So Megan has said, I'm clueless. I've never invested in anything. This might be a silly question, just trying to understand how it works. Absolutely not a silly question, Megan. This is very new to a lot of people, and obviously a lot of people, this might be your first time investing. It might be your first time investing in crowdsource funding. Just to highlight the kind of asset class that this is, when you buy shares in a company like Heartful through a platform like Birchal, you are buying fully owned ordinary shares. Now, in crowdsource funding, these shares are considered illiquid as they cannot easily be transferred or sold. However, there are numerous possible circumstances that may create an opportunity for shareholders to exit the business. I'll list a couple of those now just to give you a bit of an idea. So they include, but are not limited to, a trade purchase of the company, a listing on a registered stock exchange, a private equity investment in the company, or a share buyback in the company. You will have to make your decision to invest based on the information provided in the offer document when it becomes available. And of course, consider the general CSF risk warning and offer document that is part of every campaign. So I hope that covers most of your question there, Megan. Of course, if you've got any further questions, please reach out to Jen. Anyone on the call, if you're interested or if you've got any further questions, Jen is available and more than happy to have a chat. And, I've learned so much from Jen. I'm sure we can all learn a lot. And I might, just to wrap things up, because we've got a little bit over time, from Birchal, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll let Jen sign off. And as I said, we'll circulate this recording afterwards. So if someone wasn't able to make it, please share it with your friends, your family, your network as well, because I'm sure everyone has something to learn. But over to you, Jen.
Yeah, look, thank you so much, Anna. I was just going to sign off by saying, firstly, if you haven't yet expressed interest in investing in Heartful but you want to, please try and do that as soon as you can. It's really pivotal for us to get a full understanding of the landscape as to who's actually interested in coming on board. And so far, the response has been enormously positive, which is great. And secondly, I just want to reinforce that I am completely available and open to having a chat over the phone or an email conversation or even a chat on Zoom for anyone who has any questions. So please get in touch with me. My email address is just jen@heartful.travel. Get in touch with me anytime, and I'd be only too happy to make the time to chat with you individually about any questions you might have. But otherwise, thank you so much for attending today. I know it's a busy weekday, so I really appreciate everyone's time.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye,
Thank
Jen.
you.
Bye.